Conscious Thought, Episode 56, July 30th, 2025. Consciously Disseminating Generalized Content. Christina Herlofson, Synergetics Research Project. Reflecting on Synergetics 526.151 and Synergetics color plate number 9, wondering how anyone can figure out what it conveys to us. The average everyday person with no expertise in the language, much less how to apply its geometry and topology relative to the geometry of thinking, the integral mind of which continues to trust that since the tetrahedron is the minimum structural system of metaphysical physical universe, then logically reading or listening, observing the articulations with reference to the vector equilibrium, alert systemic thought, self-validation, and inherent ability in some yet-to-be-discovered correlation. Because the vector equilibrium is the tetrahedron's empty set. Both systems, the tetrahedron and the vector equilibrium, are relative to systemic thoughts, anticipatory design, science, projections, correlatively to structuring as you go realities. Even though the process is discernible by various degrees of consciousness evolution's dependence only on trial and error, explored survival stratagems. However, the vector equilibrium is a system, but it is not a structure in its own right. So, the human imagination's inherent ability to formulate conceptually is not discouraged from thinking to any depth of reasoning within the parameters of its own self-analysis, which is uniquely individual, as is the inherently inviolable integrity that has been maligned by more ambitious intentions within the inherited PRJWM, politics, religion, justice, war, money, hierarchies of power. Oddly enough, and unknowingly, most of us from childhood have been programmed by the R factor's labyrinth controlling ambitions. We tend to feel deeply about defending the conveyed doctrine's dogma, its elaborate edifices, icons, symbols, authoritative ruling on points of law, rights, rituals, commanding, demanding, imposing variously innovated forms of punishments and rewards that to some extent are fear engendering warnings. The seemingly predictable inevitability conveys promises or rewards as punitory predictions about what will happen after death. In any imaginable stage is elaborated by the scriber's imagination from way back millenniums ago. That would have been when false premises were initiated, some of which emulate what was previously widespread over time, amassing increasing numbers of followers. To this day, the followers constitute indoctrinated masses of humans who undoubtedly are born helpless and ignorant, with a brain encased within its skull that solely belongs to none other, no one else's cerebral circuitry design, and an evolving consciousness that naturally can learn about everything by trial and error explorations, growing more confident with every taken step, from the first baby steps at balance, walking upright across the floor, the ground under one's feet, or growing less confident the more one's independent inclinations are restricted by the control of others. Of course, the helpless child depends on the care and concern of others, the parents, the family, the friends, the neighbors, the teachers for information, respecting so many intricate details that must be interpreted by the child's inherent emulative capability and evolving intelligence to question what may conflict with its intuitive curiosity about what, where, when, why, how, thus, and so happens. The emulative capability assures the child's naturally trusting observations of essential information for its natural information gathering, problem solving, self-initiated trial and error steps will not lead its exploratory inclinations to the edge of a cliff, where hypothetically the next step goes into thin air, where the human falls, descending into whatever depth the precipice extends. Surely it can't fly out to some imaginable safety zone, which seems to be when the idea of heaven, where God lives behind the pearly gates, where heartfelt loving entities await, or the opposite, descends into the depths of total annihilation, or perhaps stuck in a type of purgatory midway between utter helplessness and hopelessness, all of which is derived by the human imagination, communicating proclivities to disseminate content. Now we know about disseminating generalized content, which drastically differs from the volumes of generated news feeds and narratives from ambitious agendas, any of which can be categorically listed under one or all of the interdependent PRJWBCHM: politics, religion, justice, war, belief, complex hierarchical matrix, and the PRJWM: politics, religion, justice, war, money, contextual parameters. So, our consciously coordinated thought and action, thought and language, can recall histories of the human condition's fear engendering adaptations to the manifest form, while considering new paradigms, the patterns of energy distribution directly integral to importing, exporting centers of energy rebirths, as a natural function of nature's conservation and our acquired knowledge that energy is always conserved. It is neither created nor ever lost in universe. These human attributes that undoubtedly were known thousands of years ago, as the actions-reactions resultants correlated with human behavior to every degree of fear and confidence depending on individual manifestations that everyone must grapple with sooner or later, depending only on trial and error survival stratagems, not necessarily putting words to the thought of the challenges, which in every case is explorable, experiential, experimental. Perhaps the human behavior patterns provided the food for manipulating ambitions of the controlling intentions to capitalize on relative ignorance as humans try to communicate what they are experiencing, which may also question the unknowable answers relative to wondering about the highest power, the power of God, as but one case in point. If so, self-serving, ambitious observers could have decided God was such a powerful position for establishing its ruling authority because humans by nature want to coexist in agreement with the most amicable relationships where self and others gather to communicate their developing thoughts, one to the other, self to others, others to self. Typically, one most outspoken leader steps in with its convincing power to persuade conformity and compliance directed toward impressing such expectations from the masses gathered thus, as inculcating indoctrination can be counted on to work every time to supplant any hope of independence from its messaging. Most of us have no memories, stored information over centuries from one partially overlapping generation to another of a minimum structural systems energy synergy for one's metaphysical conceptuality that is independent of size, time space sizing. In principle, the conceptual model's eternal integrity patterning does not conflict with systemic thoughts, anticipatory realities. Still, those misaligned anticipatory realities are ever at the edge of cognizance, which could be the point of no return or the point of origin. Referentially to critical proximity, equilibrium, balances, economies of intertransforming energy patterns intended for our species, humans of a mind, to surpass previous generations by not following their mistaken steps that historically lead into the false premised conflicts of power, including all aspects of its politics, its religion, its justice, its war, all of which seems always to require vast sums of money, regardless. That the concept money permits extremes of imbalanced survival options, where the purchasing power for many is almost non-existent, as humans have no money or plenty of it. This is especially when some humans have enormous amounts of money beyond any common sense distributions. It is where luxuriating displays of elaborate spending decadently coexist in a world filled with desperation and poverty. Utter emptiness, hopelessness, comparative helplessness can be disregarded of any relative significance or conscionable evaluation comparing one thing with another, one human condition with another, plenty and scarcity, wretchedness, squalor leading to filth and decadence. The list of deplorable living standards in the human condition goes on and on. Let's appraise the situation, comparing hierarchies, having in our individual metaphysical generalized conceptioning fields of thought the synergetic models. Until next time, thank you from Christina Herlofson.